And we're going to be talking about lack of proper leadership hinders growth. Notice I've underlined proper leadership. And the things in this lesson may not look like leadership issues initially, but indeed they are. And I will tell you in advance, you got the workbook. We're on page 15. That's where we're going to start in this session. I did my slides after I got this done. As I wrote this lesson, I had a lot of ideas in my mind. I got them down on paper, but when I put my slides together, I think I came up with some better ways of explaining things. So pay attention to my slides more than you pay attention to what's on the page. We're going to talk about some church problems and how it takes the right kind of leadership to get beyond those problems and to bring about the change that's necessary. And let me say that these things that we're talking about, these things are true in churches that have elders and churches that don't have elders. Churches that have full-time preachers and churches that don't. These are simply principles that apply regardless of the circumstance. So I want to begin by looking at some things about success and saying this, that how you define success may determine your future. If I ask you right now, in fact, let me do that. Let me ask a couple of you if you want to volunteer. How do you define success for your local congregation? Any volunteers? How do you define success? Bruce?
Well, one of the things you have to have is succession with your leadership. You may be doing really good now, but if you don't look to the future and plan ahead.
Okay, you've got to be thinking ahead. That's our next lesson where we talk about vision for the future. You're not going to have success if you're just thinking about today. You've got to think beyond today. That's one of the elements that contributes to it. Success, anyone else? A comment? Yeah, Rick. Yeah, you have to have a game plan. That's strategy. You see, there are three issues. Mission, that's what we do. Vision, look into the future. Then the strategy, how we're going to pull it off. Got to have a good game plan. I like that. Yes, sir.
Those are all strategies. If you define success, you need metrics that measure the success.
Absolutely. You've got to have measuring points along the way to determine your success. You guys are really getting into the next lesson. I guess we could go ahead and do that, but we're not going to. Why don't we get to these points? Why don't we have the measuring points? Why don't we have the game plan? Rick? Yeah, look, here's some problems. Here's how we're going to define success. Well, success is not possible in modern America. I couldn't tell you how many times we're going to cross this. People say, nobody wants to hear the gospel today. It's kind of pointless to try to preach it. Oh, we can preach to the people already saved, but the world out there doesn't want to hear the gospel. That is just not true. It's just not true. And with this kind of attitude, you'll never have success. You have just voted success off the island. Here's your second one. Success means we keep our little group going as long as we can. And with that thought, you don't have to do much, Rick. You don't have to have a game plan. Just let things run their course, and then one day you close the building. Or this. Here's another attitude. Success means we maintain this church by finding people like ourselves who will accept the status quo. The status quo is what we're about. What we are today is what we were yesterday, and it's what we're going to be tomorrow. And ethnically, socially, economically, we're going to find people who are like us. And you know what? You will survive, at least for a while. But that's not a good definition of success. Success means we add more people to the church, but we can't change any of our means or methods. Now let me say something about message. Message never changes. The gospel is firm. It is everlasting, never changes. But means and methods of doing things, they do change, and they have to change with the culture. But if this is where you are, success means we add more people to the church, but we can't change means or methods, you will never add more people to the church. Because your means and methods, most churches, their means and methods are not adding people now. And so it's not going to add people in the future. Remember, one of the definitions of insanity is you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And if we're just doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, we're failing. Here you go. Here's a fifth definition, and I think this one might work. Success means we will grow by adapting our means and methods to the time in which we live without making any compromises to the gospel. Yeah, that's something that's workable. Now, maybe you need more definition on that last one, but that approach just might work. You see, here, when you've got these kinds of definitions, these first four definitions of success, you see why leadership becomes such an issue. Because a lot of churches have parked themselves in one of these four pews right here, and they're not going to go anywhere. But there's another problem. Sometimes I hear church leaders say, "What is all this stuff you keep preaching about growth and evangelism? We're just not that interested in growth here. We're kind of happy with the way things are." I had one preacher tell me years ago, this has been 31 years ago, it was 1987, I was preaching a gospel meeting in a local church not far from where I currently live, and I knew all the people who were there. They were from that local church as well as our congregation and a few others. And I preached on evangelism, how that we can convert more people to the Lord. And one preacher afterwards said, "Well, you know, that may be okay for some churches, but at our congregation, we're not trying to bust the walls out." Why not? Someone says, "Well, you're just all about big churches, aren't you, Max? What's wrong with small churches? Why are you so obsessed with converting people?" Well, it's because we have a mission. We're on a mission from God. Jesus gave us that mission, Matthew 28, verse 19. "Go therefore, teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." But sometimes I see Christians who go all hyper-spiritual and act like church growth is a bad thing. You know, small churches are spiritual, big churches are liberal, and we don't want any part of that. Back in the 1980s, when we were on our radio broadcast and we were converting lots and lots of people, and we were sending out on our radio program, we were sending out what we called the tape of the month. And it'd be something that I'd preached, two-sided cassette tape. We sent out literally tens of thousands of those tapes. Literally. When I offered a new tape on the radio, I'd mentioned it 4 or 5 times in the course of the hour-long broadcast. We were on 5 days a week, 11 to 12 in the morning. And I would spend the next 30 minutes just answering the phone for tape requests. We sent them out by the thousands and tens of thousands. They went all over the world. And someone up in Tennessee learned about what we were doing. And they said, "Well, just watch that Pinecrest Church." That's what we were known as at the time, the Pinecrest Church. "Just watch that Pinecrest Church. It's a proven fact that any church that tries to do that much work always goes liberal." Where's your proof, pal? You see, people speak against. It's sour grapes. They speak against a church that grows, a church that is growing, that's having some success. Well, we know something's wrong over there, because if they were just preaching the truth, they wouldn't be converting anybody. Well, see, that goes right back to this one. Success is not possible in modern America. So if you're having some success at reaching people, you must be doing something wrong. And so people have this idea that small churches are more spiritual, big churches are not spiritual. I don't see the logic in that. Jesus came to do what? The Son of Man came to what? Seek and save the lost. And we're going to be real careful to make sure we don't save too many of those lost people. Keep the group small. You know, we have people who come and visit us at Dowling Road, and they say, "Ooh, we've never been in a big congregation like this." You know, we think a small church is better for us and our family. You know, it's strange. We had something happen. It's been maybe 15 years ago now. We converted a family from a Baptist church, and they came to us, and we're running, I don't know, 275, 300, something like that. We've never been in a quaint little group like this. You know, the church we came from had 2,000 in attendance. We've never been in a little small group like this. Do you all get enough money to pay your preacher? But at the same time, I mentioned to you this lady named Becky last night in one of my Bible classes. Becky and her husband came to our congregation about the same time. They came from a small church. They said, we've never been in a huge place like this. See, to one family, we were a quaint little group. To another, our group was huge. I will tell you what we really are. Dowland Road Church is a very small church compared to Jerusalem Church. Jerusalem started with 3,000 on the first day. By the time you get to Acts 4, verse 4, you got 5,000 men. So the church was growing. It was aggressive. It was having a lot of success. But we're going to be careful and make sure we don't grow so much today. And some of these bad attitudes are the things that hurt us. Is life a mystery? To some people it is. That's true with respect to evangelism and church growth. Sometimes people just can't understand why things are the way they are. I hear people ask, why do I keep getting speeding tickets? You know, every time I get stopped, I say, why me, Lord? Why do the cops always stop me? It's because you're always speeding, pal. That's it. You're always driving like you're on your way to a fire. That's the simple truth. That's no mystery. Someone else says, why are my friendships always conflicted? Why are they always troubled? Are you a gossip? That'll do it. That'll cause trouble in your friendships. I just don't know why my kids won't talk to me. Maybe the answer to that mystery is that you've never spent enough time with your kids to build a relationship with them. You see, often problems that seem mysterious to us are not really that mysterious. We just can't see the truth for ourselves. And it's that way when it comes to evangelism. We shouldn't be puzzled. We shouldn't be puzzled as to why we're not converting people. And yet oftentimes we are. One of the reasons we're not converting people is we're not doing very much evangelism. But sometimes there are some things going on in our congregation that prevent growth. Now here we come to 10 points. I'm going to give you these 10 points pretty quickly, and you tell me how many of these you have seen, okay? And so kind of keep track, put a check mark, and the way they're worded in the workbook, I think is not as good as what we have worded up here. Okay, here's reason number 1 why your congregation may not be growing. Leadership in your congregation does not address internal conflict. By leadership, I'm not talking just about elders and deacons. Every congregation has leadership. At least you've got men meeting together in a business meeting. And if there's conflict in a congregation and it's not being properly addressed, it will hurt church growth. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been to someone's house? I've been to that house here in Kokomo. You ever been to someone's house and when you walked in the door and had a seat, husband and wife were arguing? Have you ever been to that house? What did you want to do? What did you want to do when you went into that place? I want to leave. Please get me out of here. Lord, help me. I don't want to be here in the midst of this conflict. They're liable to ask, they're liable to engage me in it. Churches that are in conflict, people don't want to be there. And you know what? You don't have to come into a building and see brethren arguing. Sometimes it's just kind of hanging in the air that there's something going on here where these people don't feel right about each other. I don't know what it is, but I'm really uncomfortable being here. Have you ever been in a circumstance like that? Yeah, we've seen things like that. Leadership has got to address that. The Bible is a manual on conflict resolution. Remember those two sisters in Philippians chapter 4, verse 2, Euodias and Syntyche. Paul said, I urge them to be of the same mind. They need to learn to get along with each other. And if you're looking at your workbook there on that point, the next scripture was Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. That's a typo. It should be Philippians 2:3, where the apostle said, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory or for self-conceit. Don't act like that. That's the cause of so many problems. When you've got trouble in a church, Jesus said, you think your brother's done something wrong against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Matthew 18:15. Everybody knows that verse. Hardly anybody does what that verse says. One preacher said it is the most disobeyed scripture in the entire Bible. That your brother has done something that has upset you, maybe sinned against you, and what are you supposed to do? Go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. What is it that most people do? They tell someone else, thank you. The very thing you shouldn't do is the thing people do. And the conflicts then go on, and people then begin to choose up sides. Good leadership insists on handling conflict biblically. You see, this will cause a congregation not to grow. Leadership doesn't address internal conflict. Number two, leadership is in love with the past, not the future. Some of the means, methods, and traditions of the 1950s, 1960s, even the 1990s or the 2008s just don't work anymore. Someone says, you guys had such success with the radio program in the 1980s. You say you baptized about 400 people? That's right, about 400 people. Not just in our congregation, but all over our area. Every single congregation in our area got converts from our radio broadcast. We had as many as 10,000 people listening a day. That's what the Arbitron rating said. Why aren't we doing that today? Because what worked in 1982 does not work in 2018. It's changed. The culture has changed. You know what we had back then? Cable TV had 9 channels in 1982. Did you realize that? There was no such thing as DirecTV. There was no Dish Network. There was no online stuff where you could stream Netflix and all that. And the only talk show on television was Donahue. And if you're not old like me, you don't even know who Donahue was. That was the only talk show. AM radio was top 40 news, weather, and sports. Today, AM radio is talk all day long, all night long. FM radio does a lot of the same thing. The radio has changed. And today, almost everything in religious radio is syndicated. That is, it comes from New York or Hollywood or something like that. Local programming just doesn't do what it used to do. We had, in the early 1980s, we had a big slice of a relatively small pie in southeast Texas. Our pie size has grown only slightly, and we were on the radio as late as 4 years ago. A tiny little sliver of the pie. We couldn't even tell if it was cherry or apple. It was so small, okay? A tiny little sliver. Small audiences. An audience of 200 or 300 people rather than 5,000 or 10,000 people. Times change. And if we say, well, let's go back and do things like we used to, some of the things of the past just don't work anymore. Now, I'm talking about changing. I'm talking not about the message, and I want to emphasize that, and I'll emphasize it twice more today, that we never change the message. The apostle said in Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, if you change the message, preach another gospel, you're going to be accursed. Have you ever heard the statement, hey, let's party like it's 1999? You ever heard that? Party like it's 1999. Some churches do church like it's 1999. That is, they have no website, no social media, and if they do have those, they never tell anybody. I've started at home in my closing announcements, reminding all of our visitors, hey, go check out our website, dowlandroad.com. Check out our website. There's a lot of good information there about all kinds of Bible topics. But you see, if we're so in love with the past and we think, well, you know, let me give you this example real quick, and I want to move quickly. A brother named Doris V. Rader. Doris, D-O-R-R-I-S, not a woman, but a man. Doris Rader, I was preaching in Tullahoma, Tennessee a few years ago, and Brother Rader said to me, he said, back in the 40s and 50s, I could preach for a week and baptize 30 people in a gospel meeting. Today, he said, I preach for 30 weeks and don't baptize one. Gospel meetings do not do what they used to do. And if we're counting on that to convert people, it won't convert not like it used to. Just be mindful of that. We've got to think about the future, not the past. Here comes number 3. Leadership is unaware that things are not so great in the congregation. You know, the world is constantly judging us, and the world doesn't like fate. It doesn't like fake people. It doesn't like hypocritical people. And it doesn't like hypercritical people. By hypercritical, I'm talking about those who are just constantly criticizing anyone and everyone and everything around them. What should the world see? When it sees the people of the Cortland Avenue Church or the Woodland Hills Church in Marion, what should the people see who come and visit us or who look at us in the community, they should see people whose lives have been changed to be like Jesus. God has a plan for your life. And his plan, according to Romans 8:29, is that you be conformed to the image of his Son. People ought to look at you and see something of the character and disposition and attitude of Christ. We need to ask ourselves, have we let Christ reshape our character individually? Is our light shining in the community? People do not gravitate toward those who are unkind, those who are judgmental, people who are harsh, hard to get along with. People don't gravitate toward them. You see, sometimes leadership in a congregation is just unaware that the people are living hypocritical lives out there, or they're living hypocritical lives out there. We need to examine ourselves, and we need to make sure that we are great to be around, that people want to be around us because we're more like Jesus. And then this, leadership. One of the reasons a congregation may not be growing is that leadership is focused inwardly, not outwardly. That is, the leadership as well as the membership is focused on satisfying their own wants, their own preferences, their own desires. Many churches are self-focused organizations filled with self-focused people. Outsiders are not valued. They're not desired. They're not welcomed. They're not included. And if you live a life devoted to self, that will leave you alone all by yourself. Being outwardly focused has to begin with leadership. Our great leader, the greatest leader of all time, said we've got to be outwardly focused. He said it in Mark 16:15, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. And so it can't just be about us and our programs and us having a new carpet and us painting the walls the color we like and us doing our streaming and us having... It has to be outward focused. Not that you don't take care of things inside, but there needs to be an outward focus. And when leadership is focused inwardly, that's one of the reasons that churches don't grow. Here comes another. Leadership attacks folks in the culture as enemies. You look at things out in the culture, and certainly things in the culture present challenges. And if all you're doing is getting angry about it, how are we going to reach people in that culture? If you go up to people, your next door neighbor, and say, ain't it awful that people just don't attend church anymore like they should? And while it may be true, and your neighbor doesn't attend church, you've just taken a shot at your neighbor. Ain't it awful that people don't live right? People are drinking and smoking, and here where marijuana is now permeating our culture. Ain't it awful? And you know your neighbor smokes a joint, and he drinks alcohol. And you've just taken a couple more shots at him. See, if all you do is criticize the people around you, and listen, I find it amazing that we look at our neighbors in the community here in Kokomo and Howard County, and we're shocked that they're not living like Christians. What do we expect? They are people in the world. And for us to merely attack them, how is that going to help them? Leadership has got to set a pattern for reaching out into our culture. Sometimes people in our culture see the problems out there. And you might say to your neighbor, you know, it is true that folks don't attend church like they used to, but at our congregation, people want to be there because we have a great new preacher who's just moved to be with us. And let me take a little side note here. What little time I've spent with Mike and Stephanie, this is going to work, folks. You guys have made a great choice, okay? And I expect, if I come to Indy just about every May, I expect to see twice as many people here next year. And beyond. And beyond.
Hey, calm down.
Look, you guys can do this. You can be successful. You know, let's... Oh my goodness. Look, here's the thing. Need to set the pattern for reaching out into the culture. A lot of times people in the culture, they see the problems too. Invite them. Make this a place of refuge. People out in the culture, they're worried about their kids growing up in a world that is so wicked. And you say, hey, there's help here at Cortland Avenue. You treat the culture that way instead of jumping all over them because they don't act like Christians. Leadership is afraid to risk the status quo. Oh my, that is one. You see, Okay, we're able to pay our bills, and we don't have any debt on the building, and we're able to almost pay our preacher, and we're still doing okay. We still have our little core group. Let's not do anything different, because if we do something different, we're going to risk the status quo, and we can talk about what might be, but oh my, let's not change anything, because if we rock the boat a little bit, we might lose what we have. Well, first of all, that shows a complete lack of faith in God. It shows a lack of faith in His plan for seeking the lost. Secondly, if we're not willing to do anything challenging, would someone please cue the funeral music, because we're going to have a funeral. Someone says, that's not a very nice thing to say about churches. It is the fact. More and more churches of Christ this year, will close their doors than ever before. Why? Because they were afraid to risk the status quo. We have great possibilities before us. We've got to take advantage of the things that are out there. I learned a long time ago that you sometimes have to take risk. You sometimes have to take risk. Every successful business in Kokomo or in Beaumont or any place across the country, every successful business had to take risk. But if you just say we're going to maintain the status quo because the risk means we might fail, we might lose, then you'll never have a successful business. And it's that way with churches too. I learned a long time ago that you're better off to try something great and fail than to try nothing and succeed. And there are lots of churches that are succeeding at nothing. Don't let that be your group. Yeah, we're going to have to risk the status quo. Next, leadership can't make a decision. This happens in elderships and in men's business meetings. Well, most of us, we had the men's business meeting. Most of us thought it was a good idea, but old Brother Glue Shoes, he objected, so we decided not to do anything. I've been in those business meetings. I've been in elders' meetings where one guy just objected to everything. He had a burr under his saddle about something. And I'm not sure how you deal with that fellow necessarily. But we've got to get past this thing of men's business meetings and having to have every man's approval before we can do anything. You know, one of the things that I learned very early in my life as a Christian, and especially as a preacher, is that most of the brethren stand opposed to voting. Let's not have a men's meeting where we vote on whether we're going to do something or not, because we don't think majority rule is right. Okay, so we have one person objects. Now we have minority rule. He gets to decide everything by being the objector. And you're putting way too much power in one person's hands. I'm not sure how to fix that, man, but I would say this, that if you are that man, I want you to think about how much you're hindering the work of God over matters of judgment, not matters of faith. I think the Lord wants you to stop what you're doing. Don't be the obstinate objector that has an objection to everything that comes up in a men's business meeting. One of the reasons that churches are not growing is that leadership cannot make a decision. Well, we discussed it last month. We're discussing it this month. We'll discuss it again next month, but we'll never make a decision. We can't be like that, brethren. We can't expect to move forward. Well, I mean, what other organization can have success that can't make... If you're going to be like that, you cannot have success. Leadership is more about talking than acting. And we love to debate things. Lots of church leaders do that. It happens in elderships. Listen, we have 11 men who serve as elders in our congregation. We have 23 deacons. And sometimes our deacons disagree with one another. Sometimes our elders disagree with one another. But we've got to get past the talking, and we've got to get to the business of acting. And sometimes we're debating issues when there are no issues. I realize that debating an issue may have its place, but effective leaders do more. They act. And in most of the matters we face, we overthink things and we underact. We can do better than that. I think of the case of Paul and Barnabas in Acts chapter 15. Those guys debated whether or not they were going to take John Mark along on the second missionary journey. They debated, they disagreed, and then both of them acted, and they both acted for the benefit of the kingdom. Today, when we debate and we disagree, we'll do things that harm the growth of the kingdom. And we do things contrary to what we ought to be doing. And here's my point. If Paul and Barnabas were in a men's business meeting today, 6 months later, they'd still be debating it without a decision as to what we're going to do. We've got to do better than that. Leadership is more about talking than acting, and that's the way it is, and that's why congregations are not growing. Here's another one. Leadership doesn't think anything is wrong. Our congregation is great. We love this church, and we just can't understand why nobody else loves it. And I will tell you, that happens in so many places, and what that really means is we love our little group. And we're kind of exclusive, and we want to be together by ourselves, and we don't let outsiders in easily. When it comes to means and methods, sometimes people just say, we're not going to change. And I can understand that. You know, we become comfortable doing the same things in the same ways over and over. But we've got to find some better ways of doing things, or we're soon going to be a small club for the already convinced. We've got to reach beyond where we are. Someone says, but Max, we've been meeting for decades in this building and doing things the same way. Why do we need to change anything? Because times change, and our means and methods have to change. And what's wrong is we're not willing to make changes on things that need to be changed. And again, don't anyone go away from here says Max advocates changing the message. I've told you twice, 3 times, we keep the message the same. Here's another one. Leadership isn't really focused on God. And maybe that's at the heart of all these. Sometimes we just forget that this is ultimately about God, isn't it? It's about our Lord Jesus. It's about His mission. And when we begin to think about ourselves and our way, then we miss the mark. What's our work? We're in the business of leading people to Jesus. To what end? Well, we want their souls to be saved. But you know, it's more than just saving people's souls. Someone says, well, I thought that's what it was all about. Well, it is. But saving souls actually goes beyond just the saving of the soul. Look at John chapter 15, verse 8. One of my favorite verses in the Gospels. Jesus said, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. We're in the business of giving glory to God. Can you see that? We save souls for the glory of God. We want God to be honored, to be exalted and held high. I'm slipping over to Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. Why does this congregation exist? Why do you exist? We're going to ask more about that in our next session. But right now, why do you exist? Think about it. Look at this. Ephesians 3:20 and 21, here at the end of this chapter. Now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to Him, that's to God, to Him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations, forever and ever. Amen. The church exists for the glory of God. That's what we're really all about. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. The most fundamental thing that we do should lead to God's glory. We win lost souls for God's glory. Now, I ask you, as you looked at this list, did you see anything here that you could identify with? You know, I really debated with myself whether to include this lesson. I've been studying these things for the last several weeks, and I thought, you know, there's some reasons why churches are not doing very well. And these are some of the reasons, and I've tried to link every one of them to the leadership of a local church. And I debated within myself whether to include this, because some of these things hurt people's feelings. I know they do. I know they do. But I think the hurt feelings is worth it. And why? Because these things, one or more of these things, is true in so many churches. And until we come to grips with these things, we're not going to be what God really wants us to be. Are there any of these that really strike you? And look, you don't have to speak up, but have you seen some of these problems? I've seen them in our congregation at home. I've seen at home where we were missing on number 10. We're not really focused on God right now. We're focused on someone getting their way in the local church. And that's not working well for anybody in the church. I've seen some of these other things. People afraid to risk the status quo. When it came time for us to build a new building, oh my. One family said, hey, we live right down the street from the old building. You can't move this building to another part of town. Well, we're not going to move the building, but we're going to move the congregation. And just because you live close to the old building, listen, the neighborhood is declining. We've got a trailer park right next to the church building, and there's snakes under the trailers, and there's snakes in the trailers of a different kind. Drugs were permeating that trailer park. Across the street from the church building, Sanford and Son, okay? A junk dealer right across the street. Walk out of our door and walk across the street, a junk dealer across the street. We've got to get out of this neighborhood. People are afraid of the neighborhood. But there were people that said, oh, we can't do this. We can't leave this neighborhood. We've been here since 1949. We can't leave this neighborhood. But we had to. And that meant risk. We had to risk losing even a few members because they didn't want to go to another place. There's so many things. Oh, we'll never be able to pay for a new building, you know. All those kind of things we began to hear. And so I've seen every one of these problems. In fact, I think I've seen every one of these in our own congregation at home. So if you've seen some of these in your congregation, these are the kind of problems that we're facing right now. And these are all leadership issues. Comments or questions? I'll take a few. We're in good shape on time right now. Yes, sir.
On your second point up there, it was more about the methods, people being in love with the methods. But I think overall, sometimes we're hindered because we're nostalgic by nature. I mean, we tend to love what happened in the past, and we hold it in high esteem and embrace it. And I think sometimes we do fall in love with the past, and we live in the past, and we don't let go of those things, and it keeps us moving forward. I mean, I know that in my own life.
Yeah. The brother has nailed it. He uses the term nostalgia. We look at the past and we think, oh, the past was better than the present. You know, in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon said something about that. And he says, you're making a mistake if you think the past was better than the present. And sometimes the way we did things in the past, they make us feel good when we think about those. That's why car guys like 57 Chevys. You know, that's nostalgia. That's why we like 1950s rock and roll or 1960s, or why we like Styx or Journey, the groups from the 1970s. There's something about the past that makes us feel good. And we look at the past and say, you know, I remember when we used to have meetings that lasted 2 weeks. And what good, how many people were baptized from the community? Yeah, but can you replicate that today? If you can replicate it, fine. But you can have a 2-week meeting, but chances are you won't get your own people to come half the time. And you won't convert anyone from the community. We've got to look for some other ways to reach people. That's why the online presence and the digital revolution in technology is so critically important, that we grab hold of these things and use these as a means to contact people. But I will tell you where future growth will come from. Future growth will still come from personal invitations. There's nothing more powerful that you can do to cause the growth of a congregation than to invite people personally. That's why those little cards we talked about last night are so important. This community needs to be flooded with those. You need to put out 5 of them every week or 5 of them a month. That's what we urge of our people at home. And we've put out thousands of those cards. On one occasion, we had a lady show up on Sunday morning. I'd been telling the people, invite the checker at Walmart. And a lady shows up on Sunday morning. She says, I don't know anything about this church, but 3 people, she's a checker at Walmart, 3 people gave me this card yesterday. I had to come find out what this was all about. And listen, I was in, what town was it? Columbia, Tennessee, preaching at the Jackson Heights Church. And on Sunday night, I preached a sermon about inviting the checker at Walmart and inviting everybody. Don't scratch people off the list. Invite everybody. The next day, Lee and I were at the Walmart, and we're going through the line, and I thought, I told the people at Jackson Heights Church, invite your checker at Walmart. So I got to do that. And so I get up there, and I say to the lady, my name is Max Dawson. Listen, I don't have a card or anything, but I'm preaching tonight at Jackson Heights Church. It's up on this hill, and here's how to get there. I'd love to have you come tonight and hear the gospel. She said, well, I'm going to do that. Well, people will say things like that, but they don't show up. You know that. And I was convinced that she was going to come. And I stood at the back door during the first and second song hoping she would show up, and she wasn't there. And I was a little disappointed, but not overly so. And I waited till the last minute. Then I had to get up and preach. And about 7:30, 30 minutes into the service, she comes in the back door, and she and another lady and her son, there's three of them come in. And these, by the way, are black folks. A congregation, not a single black folk in there. And here come three black people into an all-white congregation. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, she came, great. But how will these people receive her? When the service was over, the people swarmed around them. We're so glad you came. They hugged them. They said, we want you to come back tomorrow night. And I was thinking, through that checker at Walmart, we made a good contact. But you know what? She never obeyed the gospel. But the lady she brought, they set up a Bible study with her, and she obeyed the gospel. You never know. You just got to invite people. It works, folks. When you invite, people will come. And that's what's happening. Churches that are doing this are being successful because they're generating visitor flow, contacts mean Bible studies, some of them will be converted. Another question or comment? One more. Yes, sir.
I was thinking about the second point as well, and one of the things that I think we have to be careful about is not just not focusing too much on the past, we also need to not focus too much on the future. So I think that's where we get into where we can't make a decision a lot of times, is where we're so focused on the future, or more about the talking and not acting. We're so focused on the future that we don't do anything now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's really kind of what you were saying with just go and invite people. Don't do that next week. Do that now.
Yeah. What he's saying is that we got to be careful that we're not so focused on the future, talking about someday I'll do something. We've got things to do right now. And that really gets us into our next lesson about mission, vision, and strategy. And we're going to start that in 5 minutes from right now. Let's take a break.